Hello students, today we will study thermodynamics theory part 2. So what are the topics that we are going to cover today? So we will cover heat capacity, Kirchhoff's equation, entropy change, second law of thermodynamics, Carnot tension, third law of thermodynamics, Gibbs free energy, criteria for spontaneity, and relation between Gibbs free energy change and equilibrium constant. Okay, so these are the topics we are going to cover today. In the previous class, we have mainly focused upon the first law of thermodynamics, and today our main focus will be on second law, I would guess, and there will be some tips of the third law. Okay, so these are the two things that we are going to see today, primarily. In addition to that, we will see the heat capacity and your Kirchhoff's equation. Rest of the things are included in the second law and third law, means they are the outcome or the functions that are related to first, the second law, and the third law. Clear? Okay, so let us start. So before that, this disclaimer is here. The disclaimer says that images used in our slide deck are for educational purposes only. We respect the intellectual property rights of the original creators and owners of these images. If you are the owner of any of the images used in this deck, have any concerns or issues, please contact us at sathi@itk.ac.in and we shall remove the images. So first we will start from the heat capacity. So what is heat capacity? So if I want to define it in simpler terms, then I would say that suppose you have taken an amount of a substance. Suppose you have taken suppose you have taken iron. Okay, you have taken iron. Now the amount of that iron is not defined. I am supposing it as 3 grams or 2 grams or 1 kg. Okay, suppose I am supposing it as 1 kg. Now you start heating that compound. Now as you start heating the iron, the temperature of the iron will increase. So there is a time when the temperature of the iron changes by 1 unit. Okay, either by 1 degree Celsius or by 1 Kelvin. It doesn't matter. Both of them will have the same effect. Okay, so you can just conclude in this way. So suppose you are going from 0 degree Celsius to 1 degree Celsius, then also the change is 1 degree Celsius or 1 unit. If you are going from 273 Kelvin to 274 Kelvin, in that case also your change is 1 unit. Okay, both things are similar. Okay, so change is always same. You don't have to worry about it. Now to bring this amount of change in temperature, that is 1 degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin change in temperature, the heat that is supplied at that time is called as your heat capacity and it is represented by C. Clear? So again I am repeating it. So in terms of the definition, that it is the amount of heat that is required to raise the temperature of the system by 1 degree Celsius. So since we are dealing with system and surrounding thermodynamics and we are worried about the system, so the amount of heat that is required to change the temperature of the system by 1 degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin is called as the heat capacity and it is represented by C. So if you are given the formula, then the formula would look like this. Suppose you have supplied Q amount of heat to raise the temperature by delta T. Means the change in temperature is given by delta T. So suppose you have supplied Q amount of heat to change the temperature by delta T. Then to change the temperature by 1 Kelvin or 1 degree Celsius will be how much? It will be simply Q by delta T. That is the direct application of the unitary method. So for delta T, Q amount is heated. So for 1 Q by delta T will be required. So that is your heat capacity or C. As simple as that. Again I am repeating it, that we are saying that to raise the temperature by delta T, you need Q amount of heat. So what is the amount of heat that is required to change the temperature by 1 unit? So it will be Q by delta T, right? And that is the definition of your C. That is the heat capacity. Now what are we going to do? So in this case, the heat capacity that we have defined, this heat capacity is a extensive or intensive property. So if you think of it, then it is clearly an extensive property, because in this case we have not defined that what is the amount of the system or what is the weight of the system or what is the volume of the system. So if your system is comprising of only iron and its weight is 1 kg, then it will require some amount different amount of heat. Now if you take suppose 2 kg of iron in the system and you have to rate the temperature by again by 1 degree Celsius, then a different heat capacity or a different amount of heat will be required. So we can conclude that your heat capacity is an extensive property by looking at this way. Okay, now what are we doing? We are going to restrict our system moles by 1 mole. Clear? Now we are saying that we are taking only 1 mole of the substance, and that of a single substance. So in this case, we are taking for a single substance. So we are taking 1 mole of a particular substance, and the amount of heat that is required to change the temperature of that 1 mole of a substance by 1 degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin. So I am using this term to and fro 1 degree Celsius and 1 Kelvin again and again, and using a or between these two words because because these two are same. If you are change in temperature has no unit, it is same for degree Celsius, same for Fahrenheit. Okay, so the amount of heat that is required to change the temperature of a given substance, which is 1 mole, by 1 Kelvin or 1 degree is called as the molar heat capacity and is represented by Cm. Okay, Cm. So we are using a M subscript to represent the molar heat capacity. Clear? Okay. Now at the same time, what we do, if we keep the weight 1 gram, so in this case we are restricting our mole, and in this case we are restricting the mass. Means in this case also we are restricting a mass, but in an indirect way, because 1 mole of a substance has a definite mass for each and every substance particularly. So if we take 1 gram of the substance, and in that case the amount of heat that is required to raise the temperature by 1 unit, then in that case your heat will be called as specific heat of the system, or CS. Now we have used the term CS, in which S later has been subscripted to S, so to C, to denote our specific heat of the system. Clear? Okay. Now let us compare that whether these two are extensive or intensive. Now in case of heat capacity, the mass was not defined, so changing the mass was giving us different heat capacity for different mass. But since here your mass is defined, okay, you are saying that we are having 1 mole of a substance or we are having 1 gram of a substance, then our mass is defined. Then in that case our heat capacity will become molar heat capacity or specific heat capacity respectively, and in this case they are intensive property. Now how can you get it? So you can get it in two ways. So the first way, I would say that since we are getting our molar heat capacity by which formula, so if we look at the formula, so suppose 20 mole of a substance required x amount of heat, then 1 mole of substance will require 20 by x. Okay, so here mole is also extensive property and your heat capacity is also extensive property, we have seen it. So the division of two extensive properties also always an intensive, we have seen in the theory part 1. Clear? So in this way you can say for both CS also you can say, conclude in this way. And if you think it in practical terms, then you can think simply that if you are saying that 1 mole has been defined, so you take 1 mole of iron in any way, right? So if you take the iron that is in your door, or you take the iron that is in the mineral, or in the say in the any apparatus, then if you are taking the 1 mole of that iron, it will always and always require the same amount of heat respective of the source we are taking the iron from, but the composition of iron should be perfect. So if you are saying iron, then it should be a pure iron. That should be clear. Same thing goes for your heat capacity. So I would conclude that your heat capacity is extensive, and your molar heat capacity and specific heat capacity are intensive. Clear? So what is the formula for molar heat capacity or specific heat capacity? So for specific heat capacity is given as Q is equals to Cs into M into delta T, or you can calculate Cs simply by Q divided by M by delta T. So this term is obvious for CS, and we are again dividing this term by M to calculate it for 1 gram. Okay, so here your mass will be in gram. So it can be in kgs also, but it should be a say unit mass. Okay, it should be a unit mass, whichever unit you are taking. Okay. Now same thing is written. M is the mass of the substance, and Cs is specific heat of the capacity, specific heat capacity, and your delta T is temperature. Okay. Now these are the two types. There are two types of heat capacity on the conditions. Okay, there are more two types of heat capacity which on based on the condition, that at what means what are the things that you are keeping uh, or you're standardizing when you are calculating the amount of heat. So in that we have two conditions of pressure and volume. So how is this pressure and volume? Let us see. So the first thing is heat capacity at constant pressure. So the term also defines it very well. But if you don't get it, then I would explain that in this way, that you are trying to raise the heat of a substance and you are supplying heat at constant pressure. Okay, then in that case, the amount of heat that is required to raise the temperature of a substance by 1 unit will be called as Cp. Clear? So what are we doing? We are supplying heat at constant pressure, and the heat capacity that is calculated at that constant pressure is called as heat capacity at constant pressure, or Cp. Simple. So you can denote in this way: Cp is equals to Q by delta T multiplied by P. Now this Q P. So if you just keep it in simpler term, then this is heat supplied at constant pressure, and heat supplied at constant pressure is called as enthalpy. So we have substituted it with the enthalpy. The temperature change is same. So now we have a new formula for Cp, which is Cp is equals to dH by dt, or Cp is equals to delta H by delta T. But in this case, what we have concluded, so there is a very peculiar point here. So yeah, it may look complex it may look complex at some time, but it is very obvious, right? So basically what happens to a material when you try to change the heat of the substance, or you try to change the temperature of the substance, then in that case your molar heat capacity varies with temperature. Okay, that thing is very very obvious, that maybe your the heat capacity of a substance at 200 kelvin, and the heat capacity of the substance, and not at 200, at suppose 280 kelvin, and your heat capacity of the substance at 300 kelvin would be different, because Cp is in ideal case same. Cp is same in the ideal case, but in the real world your Cp is a function of temperature. So in that case, if you have to calculate Cp, then in that case you have to integrate this thing to get your Cp. But since we are taking the ideal case, and it is very good for your level, for means in this 12th class or your JEE, maybe you may be asked in this way that your H is varying according to the temperature. That may be a case, but for now you may conclude that your Cp is constant with temperature. Okay, then you can replace this D with delta, that for large change also it will be same. Then you can write delta H by delta T. So we have a new formula for enthalpy, and which is very very powerful and useful, which is delta H is equals to Cp dt, or Cp delta T. Now same thing can be said for your volume. So if you are supplying heat at constant volume, then in that case your heat capacity at constant volume is written as Cv. And again we have this. So since we are supplying heat at constant volume, therefore Qv is equals to du, and a new formula again emerges, which is Cv is equals to du by dt. And in case your Cv is temperature independent, then Cv is equals to delta U by delta T. Clear? Okay, so you have two formulas for delta H and delta T, and from here you can clearly say that your delta U and delta H is 0 if the process is isothermal, right? Okay, if the process is isothermal, your delta H and delta U is always 0. So this is the thing. Now we have a relationship between Cp minus Cv, which is equals to R, where R is what? R is the molar gas constant. Okay, R is the molar gas constant, but it is gas constant for 1 mole. That is your 8.314 by Na. Clear? So this is your thing. So this is your molar heat capacity. Now in this case, your Cp and Cv are also molar heat capacity at constant pressure and molar heat capacity at constant volume. Now, this is very, very important. So, it is seen that for a monoatomic gas, your CV value, okay, your CV value is equals to 3 by 2R. Now, from this formula, if you have a value of CV or if you have a value of CP, then you can easily calculate either of them by using this formula, because R is fixed, right? R is fixed, its value is 8.314 joule per Kelvin. Now, if you are writing it for say n moles, then this formula becomes Cp minus Cv equals to Nr. Okay, so the original formula would be Cp minus Cv equals to Nr. For 1 mole it is true, right? So keep this in mind. If your number of moles is changing, you will multiply n by here. Okay, you will write n here. So anyways, now Cp is equals to 3 by 2R, and now using this formula you can calculate Cp also. Now, so for monoatomic gas, your heat capacity at constant pressure can be written as Cp is equals to 3 by 2R. We have calculated it. So if you bring Cv on the either side, that is on the RHS side, then it will be added to the R, and that will give you 5 by 2R as your Cp value. Okay, so this is a very, very important relation, and it is very much used in the numerical part. Now moving on to a new term which is called as Poisson's ratio. So this is called as Poisson's ratio, and it is represented by gamma. And very simple definition, it is Cp by Cv, or the ratio of Cp is to Cv. So this is 5 by 3 for your monoatomic gas. So if you just divide your Cp, which is this thing, 5 by 2R, by Cv, which is 3 by 2R, then you will get 5 by 3. R and R will get cancel out, and Poisson ratio, that is your gamma value, will be how much? It will be 1.66 for monoatomic gas. Okay, it is written here also. Now, what do you mean by monoatomic gas? So this is also very important to know that all the noble gases which are not capable of dimerizing or trimerizing with its same type, they all fall under the criteria of what? Monoatomic gases. Clear? Now next, for diatomic gases like H2, O2 and CO, it is given by 1.40. Okay, so gamma value is 1.40. So you can see very clearly that as the number of atoms in a single molecule is increasing, the gamma value is decreasing. Similarly, for triatomic gas like H2O, so if it is present in steam form, then it will be a gas only. Ozone, for these all, the gamma value is 1.33. So you should remember these four values. These are important for physics thing also, and for the chemistry also. So questions are asked from here, right? Now moving on to work done in reversible adiabatic expansion. So we have now defined this gamma. So there is a reason behind it, because the formula for your work done is sometimes dependent upon this thing. So work done will be given by what? For adiabatic expansion. So since it is adiabatic, your Q value will be 0. Therefore, your work done will be equals to your internal energy, and internal energy is given by CV delta T. Okay, so see, we have used your delta because we have assumed that your CV value is independent of temperature. Clear? So that would give you CV T2 minus T1. Now, there is a relation between CV, R and gamma, which is given by CV equals to R by gamma minus 1. Very easy to derive. You know that Cp minus Cv equals to R, right? You just bring this thing here, divided by Cv again, and you will get your thing. Okay, very easy to solve. Just try to do it by yourself. You will get this thing. Okay, you know these two equations, that Cp by Cv equals to gamma and Cp minus Cv equals to R. From this, you can derive this thing easily. Clear? So how you will get it? So you know that if you multiply Cv by gamma, what you will get? So Cv is equals to Cp by Cv. Cv and Cv gets cancelled out, and you will get Cp here. And Cv multiplied by 1 will give you Cv. That means Cp minus Cv equals to R. Then how you can convert it? You know this thing, right? So just take the Cp minus Cv equals to R. Take Cv common from there. Okay. Then this will and substitute Cp by Cv by gamma, and you will get your equation. Clear? Okay. Now this is true for your adiabatic processes. Okay, this is a very, very, very important thing for you. That you know that for an ideal gas, P1 V1 equal to P2 V2. So this is for an ideal gas during any process. But in case of adiabatic process, this thing does not work. you have to take P1 V1 gamma, where gamma is power to V. Okay, that same gamma. P1 V1 gamma equal to P2 V2 gamma, or for a single species you can write it that PV gamma is equals to constant. Okay, so this is very very important. Now next thing what you can do, so this is the relation between PV. Now next thing what you can do, just replace V with a different terminology. Okay, with the help of ideal gas. So you can write here V equal to an RT by P. Okay, then R is since constant, you will bring this thing here on this side, and you can get a new equation again. So if you just substitute V equal to nRT by P, what you will get? So nRT, T will have gamma, clear, and P will have 1 minus gamma. Okay, so in this way you can have a relation between T and V. So this is very very important. Okay, so suppose you are so as I've told you, substitute V equal to nRT by P. Now what you do in the next part, that you keep the pressure constant. Okay, you keep the pressure constant. So in this case your pressure and volume is changing and your temperature is constant. In the next case, take pressure constant, so that pressure will multiply on the constant side, and you will be left with a different equation which is including V and T, then with P and T. Clear? So you will get three different equations. Now moving on further, next is Kirchhoff's equation. So what is Kirchhoff's equation? So Kirchhoff's equation says that your partial derivative of the change of enthalpy, okay, change of enthalpy or of internal energy during a reaction is with respect to temperature at constant pressure equals to the change in heat capacity at constant pressure. Now in the bracket we have the other case. So if you are talking about enthalpy, you will talk about constant pressure and you will get heat capacity at constant pressure. And if you are talking about internal energy, then you will talk about volume, and then you will talk about your heat capacity at constant volume. So this is the thing. Now since we have taken the partial derivative, we can integrate that equation and derive at our final equation, which is the useful equation for you for this thing. So if you just integrate this statement equation that you will get upon putting the statement, then you will get this thing, which is delta Cp delta H2 minus delta H1 T2 minus T1. Clear? Similarly, your delta Cv can be written as delta U2 minus delta U1 T2 minus T1, where T2 is at where delta H2 is the heat capacity, enthalpy change at constant temperature, that is T2, and this is your heat capacity at temperature T1. Okay, heat capacity change at temperature T1, and delta Cp is the temperature molar heat capacity at constant pressure change, or heat capacity at constant pressure change. Clear? Okay, now we can write Cp as what? Cp can be written as molar heat capacity at constant pressure for all products, summation of all the products, and molar heat capacity of all the reactant summation. Just take a difference between these two and you will get your delta Cp. Similarly, your delta Cv can be calculated in the same way. Only what you have to do is you have to take the heat capacity at constant volume for all the products. You take the summation, and heat capacity at constant volume for reactant, take the summation and subtract both of this, and you will get your change in heat capacity at constant volume. Clear? Okay. So this is all about the Kirchhoff's equation. Now with this we have almost completed the first law and all the aspects of the first law. Next thing, we are going to move to the second law, and for second law the most important term is your entropy. So we'll see upon it first of all. So let us talk about entropy change. Now the entropy is defined with a very familiar definition. So if you have heard this entropy first time also, then in the previous time, means in your classes or in your tuitions and all, then you must have heard this definition very often, that it is the measurement of disorderness or randomness. Okay, that how randomly or how disordered a thing is being arranged. Clear? So this thing is called an entropy, and it's very 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 important. So think it in this way, that suppose you are taking a volume of gas having suppose any number of molecules or Avogadro number of molecules. Now what you are doing, you are taking a bunch of them, and with the help of your hand, so I'm taking a hypothetical case, with the help of your hand you're holding all those molecules in your hand, and since they're now close to each other, they're having some interaction, they're kind of ordered. Now if you take that and put it in a bigger container, then what will happen? it will quickly expand. Okay, it will quickly expand throughout the volume and without any external aid. Clear? So what you can say is that if your entropy is increasing, then your process can be spontaneous. So this is the thing we thought of. Okay, they thought of in the earlier that if something is getting more and more disordered, then the system will tend to move in that direction. Okay, move towards more randomness or more disorderedness, and for that they have defined a term which is entropy. Now, what was the problem with this thing? The problem was this thing was that you have to not only measure the entropy of the system but also of the surrounding. And now the delta S total should be greater than zero and not your individual entropy or system. Sorry, your surrounding and system. Now, what is the difficulty with this? We cannot calculate the entropy change with respect to the universe because the amount of heat it is getting, the amount of mass it is receiving or giving to the system, that is very, very difficult to calculate. And for this reason, your entropy formula or your entropy term is not good enough to explain the spontaneity. Clear? So again, I am repeating it. So it was very difficult to calculate or to determine the entropy change with respect to your system and surrounding. Okay, simultaneously you have to calculate for whole total, so this is what difficult, and for that reason we are not able to predict the spontaneity of the system using the entropy concept. Clear? Okay. Now now what is del S total? I have already discussed. So it is delta S system plus delta at surrounding, so it should be always greater than 0 or it can be equal to 0 in that case of your equilibrium. So again, entropy is a state function, right? So it depends upon the initial and final state. The only path function are your heat and work. So those two are the only path function, but they are also not path function as certain cases. Suppose your QP is not the path function, that is your heat transferred at constant pressure, and your heat transferred at constant volume is also not what is also not a path function, because in that case your QV or QP is equals to your enthalpy and your internal energy. Clear? Okay. So this equation is very, very important. And the second thing is, in entropy is a state function. You can calculate the thing with the knowing the initial and final state. So it is written in mathematical terms. Similar thing. So unit of entropy is joule per Kelvin. So we'll see how it is using the formula. So suppose you are doing a reversible change at constant temperature. Then in that case, your entropy can be calculated using this formula simply, which is delta S is equals to Q reversible by T. So this is the formula that we use to calculate the entropy change for reversible changes. Now, what do you mean by reversible changes? So by this we mean that whatever process you are doing, in that process you are applying heat or you are supplying heat reversibly. Okay, so this thing in your mind, that this formula is only applicable if you know that for that process, if your heat was supplied reversibly, then what would be the entropy change. Clear? Okay, so Q reversible is what? It is the heat absorbed or evolved at absolute temperature T. Clear? Now moving further. So if your delta S is greater than 0, heat is absorbed, and if your delta S is less than 0, then heat is evolved. Okay, it is obvious because change in temperature we are now considering here. Okay, so for that reason, your delta S and delta S will be less than 0 for your heat is evolved. Now next important formula is your this thing, which is your isothermal process. So we have seen that it is Q by delta T, and suppose the process is spontaneous, then in that case what you will do, you will use this formula, which is delta S equals to 2.303 nr log V2 by V1. Next is phase transition. So what is phase transition? It is basically the change of state from one to another. Suppose, so in that case, in a tropic change for the phase transition. So here we will see the examples also. Suppose you are doing the melting, you are moving from ice to water. Then in that case, some heat will be absorbed. So that is equals to delta H fusion by Tm, which is the melting point. Okay, so delta S melting point become delta H fusion by Tm. Next is, suppose you are doing vaporization, then the heat that is required to do that vaporization, or the enthalpy change during that vaporization, is called as delta H vaporization, and therefore your formula becomes delta S by delta H vaporization by TB. So this is all for your phase transition. And the last one is sublimation, if you are converting your solid directly into gas. Now the question may arise that we have seen the formula that delta is equals to Q by T. Then why are we replacing Q with delta H? So the answer is very very simple, that your Q is nothing but your delta H only at constant pressure, and Q is nothing but delta U only at constant volume. Clear? So for that reason, what we have done here is that, so since all these processes are occurring at constant pressure, just like melting, vaporization and sublimation, so since therefore we have replaced your Q, that is your QP, with your delta H. Okay, clear? So in this way we are doing it. Now moving on further, second one is second law of thermodynamics. So what is second law of thermodynamics? So this law is mainly based upon that how can we know that a process is spontaneous or not. Okay, and it also helps us to know the maximum fraction of heat that can be converted into work in a given process. See, you supply heat, right? You supply heat, but due to some external factor or due to non-ideal condition, the amount of heat that you have supplied, maybe that will be not equal to the amount of work that we get. Okay, that is very very obvious. Now the second law says that whether a given process or so it is helping us to predict the spontaneity, and the second law states that the entropy of the universe is continuously increasing and tends to mass maximum. So this is very very important point. Okay, so many of the questions are based upon this. And why is it so? This is because for irreversible process, ds is greater than dq by t. I have told you that delta is equals to q reversible by t, but for irreversible process it is greater than entropy, right? Entropy is greater. So for every irreversible process, your ds is increasing, and all the processes that you see around yourself are irreversible, and for that reason you will see that your entropy of the universe is increasing due to this reason, because all the processes are irreversible, means your delta is increasing all the time. Clear? Now if you consider your equilibrium case, then in that case your ds become equals to dq by d. Okay, or you take the reversible case, not the reversible one. So if you take the reversible case, then in that case your ds is equal to dq by dt, where q reversible is the heat supplied at constant what? Q reversible is the heat supplied at constant temperature and for reversible process. Okay, so in this way you can define this general formula, and this is for your all this is all for your second law of thermodynamics. This is mathematical statement and very very important for you. Now moving on further, next is Carnot engine. So it was say created by Carnot in 1824, and it was a hypothetical situation in which he tried to calculate the efficiency upon which it is abbreviated. So what we do in a Carnot engine, that we take a source and a sink, and then what happens, that heat is going from source to sink and some work is being done, and the remaining amount of heat that we get is supplied back to the source. So this is the overall process. Now we are doing this in multiple steps. So these are the steps, that first we are going isothermal expansion, then we are moving to adiabatic expansion, then isothermal compression, and then adiabatic compression. And in this whole process we are coming back to the same state that from which we are started. Clear? So same thing written, P1 V1, then P2 V2, then P3 V3, P4 V4. Clear? Okay. Now there are four multiple steps. First you are expanding it isothermally and then adiabatically, and then you are compressing it, that also isothermally and adiabatically, and through this whole process you are moving to the same state from where you have started. So this is a very good example of your Carnot engine. So we can say that for a Carnot engine we can write that isothermal reversible expansion, adiabatic reversible expansion, these are two things, then your isothermal reversible compression and your adiabatic reversible compression. Clear? So here we have calculated the net work done in every cycle. Oh, in every say path. So if you have to calculate for the whole cycle, how you calculate? So you will simply add all the whole paths. So for path 1 it is nRT ln V2 by V1, nRT ln V4 by V3. Clear? Next we have the heat absorbed at in the whole cycle is. So what is the heat net heat? It is given by R T2 minus T1 by ln V2 by V1. Now how they would have been calculated this? So you can try to calculate it by yourself. So remember that the heat for two steps are zero. That is for two adiabatic expansion and adiabatic compression. For both of this, your heat will be zero. You have to calculate it for two path. Similarly, this is the thing for your heat absorbed, and this is your net work done in one cycle. Okay, net work done in the whole cycle I am saying. Now this is the heat supplied, and this is the work done. Now this both should have been equal, right? Then only your first law is satisfied, because it says that all of the heat that is supplied is converted to your work. So that is your basic fundamental of the first law. But this is not the ideal case. So for that, we in keeping this in mind, we calculate the efficiency of the cell, which is denoted by eta and is given by W by Q2, where Q2 is what? Q2 is the amount of heat that we have supplied. So, and W is what? W is the amount of work it has done. So there are two things. So when you are doing the expansion, you are supplying heat, Q2. When you are doing the compression, you are getting back heat. So that thing is not mentioned, because that is rejected by the source. Clear? By the not by the source, by the yes, by the source. So W is the overall work done, and Q2 is the amount of heat that is supplied. If you calculate it with a small calculation, you don't need to worry about it. It is given by T2 minus T1 by T2, where T2 is greater than T1, because T2 is for the sink and T1 T2 is for the source and T1 is for the sink. So they will get as 1 minus T1 by 1 minus T1 by T2. So you can remember it in this way, that your T2 will be always greater than 1, because efficiency can never be negative. Okay. So this was the theory that was mainly given by Carnot, and it says that every perfect engine working reversibly between the same temperature limits has the same efficiency, whatever be the working substance. Okay. Now moving further, we have third law of thermodynamics. So it's a very native or naive statement at first sight, because it looks very naive. So it says that entropy of a perfectly crystalline substance approaches zero as the absolute zero temperature is reached. So if you take a crystalline substance and you keep the temperature to zero, absolute zero means that is 273. Zero, that is 0 Kelvin. So that thing is not possible, right? So first of all, this 0 Kelvin temperature is not attainable. And if it is unattainable, then it is said that at that temperature your system will have zero entropy, because the system is having no energy, 0 Kelvin, no energy. And since it is having no energy, it will not move or it will not vibrate. And as a result of it, what will happen? As a result of it, your molecule will have the least amount of entropy. So we can say that as the temperature tends to zero, okay, if you limit the temperature tends to zero, then your entropy becomes zero. Okay, so this is the statement behind the second law. Clear? Next is our Gibbs free energy, and this is the most important function. Okay, this is the most important function, thermodynamic function, I would say. So it is what? It is the maximum amount of heat, and it is the maximum amount of energy that is available for a system to during a process that can be converted into useful work. Okay, so it is basically what? It is the amount of maximum amount of energy that is available to the system. Now, under standard condition of temperature and pressure, the free energy for a process in which the reactant in the standard state is converted into product, their state is called the standard free energy. So whenever we are doing a conversion at standard condition, then in that case your change in free energy will be called as standard free energy, right? So the change in Gibbs energy of systems as a function of temperature can be calculated by the Gibbs-Helmholtz equation, which is given as delta G equal to delta H minus T delta S. So this is very important formula. Questions are asked from here multiple times. So delta G is what? Simply it is change in Gibbs free energy, and the following cases are possible for delta G, which is if delta G is greater than 0, then your process is non-spontaneous. So just keep your ears open. This is very important thing. So if you are having delta G greater than 0, then your process is non-spontaneous. If it is less than 0, then it is spontaneous, that in case of negative. And if it is 0, then it is equilibrium. So what is the meaning of this? That if your final Gibbs energy is less than the is more than the initial, sorry, is less than the initial one, then in that case you will get a delta G negative, right? Clear? Means the maximum amount of energy that is available to do the work should decrease during a process, and then only your process will become spontaneous. Otherwise it will become non-spontaneous. So if delta G is positive, it is non-spontaneous. If it is say less than 0 or negative, change in Gibbs energy is negative, then it is spontaneous. And at equilibrium it equals to 0, right? So this is very important, and you can direct means I would not set a derivation. You can just satisfy yourself that we know that delta G equal to minus RT ln K. We know this thing. Okay. So if you are saying that the system is at equilibrium, that means the delta G is 0. Okay. Then you will say that your K is what? Your K is having a value of 10. So just think about it one time. Now the thing is that why is Gibbs free energy more important than your entropy? What is the difference that it has made? Entropy was also able to predict the spontaneity. When it was positive, the process was spontaneous. It was not positive, then in that case the process was non-spontaneous. So what was the magic that Gibbs free energy brought? So the magic is that in your Gibbs free energy, you don't have to worry about the surrounding. If you are good to go to calculate the system Gibbs energy change, you will easily find that a process is spontaneous or not. And this is was important. I explained this thing to you also, because to calculate the changes with regards to surrounding is very difficult. So the delta G for decide the spontaneity of the process, and it is negative, the process is spontaneous. So this is the thing that I want to discuss with you. For this, if you want to get how it is how we are getting this, just get back to the formula where we say that delta is equal to delta S minus T delta S. So if your delta S is positive, then your T delta S is also positive. Okay, and if your delta H is negative, that means that the two terms that we have is having a negative sign. As a result, your delta G will be negative at all temperature. Clear? Next thing is that if delta S is negative and delta H is negative, that means your delta H is negative. Okay, good. But if your delta S is negative, then it will be multiplied with the negative sign of the formula, and that will result in a positive value. So if your temperature will rise, the positive value will rise, and hence in this condition it is negative at low temperature. Clear? Because as you increase the entropy, your delta S will also rise. Your T delta S term will also rise, and since it is negative, it will become more and more positive. Clear? So it is spontaneous at low temperature, as it is negative at low temperature but positive at high temperature. Now spontaneous at low temperature but not spontaneous high temperature, same thing written here. Now if both are positive, then your reaction will be spontaneous at a lower temperature, because this temperature is getting multiplied with the delta S. We decide the delta G. So it is spontaneous at high temperature. Next is your delta S and delta H is negative and positive spontaneous in both case. And in that case, it is positive at all temperature and the process is spontaneous at all temperature. So two things you have to remember. First of all, that if delta S is positive and delta H is negative, then in that case spontaneity is at all temperature. If it is opposite of that, then it is non-spontaneous at all temperature. If both are negative, then it is negative at low temperature. If both are positive, it is positive at low temperature. Clear? Okay. Next is relation between Gibbs free energy and equilibrium constant. So what is the relation between these two? Very simple. Delta G equal to delta G naught plus 2.303 RT log Q, or delta G equal to delta G naught plus RT ln Q. Both can be the formula. Where Q is your what? Q is your reaction quotient of the equilibrium. that same thing. Okay, means the you are taking the concentration of the product by concentration of the reactant, each raised to the stoichiometric coefficient, and that thing is not at equilibrium but at any condition. In that case, your ratio that you will get will be your reaction quotient. Now what we do is we keep the equilibrium condition. So in equilibrium condition, what will happen? Your delta G will become 0, because now your delta G naught will be equals to what? Minus 2.303 log K. Okay, so why is it so? So at equilibrium, what happens? The amount of substance that is going to the product, it reverts back to the reactant at with the same rate, and that thing, what it does to the reaction, that it keeps the concentration constant. So if you just think of it, then the amount of work, the amount of energy that is available to do the work is same on either case, and therefore you get the value as 0. Just think of it in a way that you are moving the reaction such that your energy that is available to do the work is greater on the product side, but since it is a equilibrium, so it becomes 0. And now Q is substituted with K. So your formula is delta G naught equal to minus 2.303 RT log K, or minus 2.303 RT ln K, where K is your equilibrium constant. Now let us sum up all of this with a summary. First is your heat capacity. So it was the amount of heat that is required to raise the temperature of the system by 1 degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin. Its formula is C equal to Q by delta T. Okay. Second is molar heat capacity, which is the amount of substance. What is the amount of heat to raise the substance of 1 mole of a substance? Sorry. So molar heat capacity is the amount of heat that is required to raise the heat temperature of 1 mole of a substance by 1 degree Celsius or 1 Kelvin, and it is given by CQ by delta T multiplied by the number of moles, means divided by the number of moles, and specific heat capacity, it is divided by the mass of the substance if it is in gram. Okay, same thing is given. Now this was our Cp and Cv, which is your heat capacity at constant pressure and constant volume, and is given dH by dt, and is given by dV by dt. Okay, Cv is given by du by dt, not du by dt, du by dt, right? And Cp minus Cv is equals to R, but if it is having n moles, then Cp minus Cv equals to nR. And if you just use this formula, and you know that Cp by Cv equals to gamma, then you can derive this equation, which is Cv equals to R by gamma minus 1. Now gamma was given by Cp by Cv, we have seen that. So for monoatomic gas it is 1.66, for diatomic gas it is 1.40, and for triatomic gas it is 1.33. Clear? Okay. Now moving to the next summary part. So inotropy is the measurement of randomness, we have seen that, and it is given by Q reversible by T, where Q is the amount of heat supplied reversibly. For Carnot engine, we have seen that the net work done is given by RT, RT2 ln V2 by V1, RT1 ln V4 by V3, and your net heat is given by RT2 minus T1 ln V2 by V1. Therefore, your efficiency is calculated by 1 minus T1 by T2, where your and how it is calculated? It is calculated by net work done by the amount of heat supplied at the second step, that is Q2. Now third law of thermodynamics says that if your temperature is approaching to 0, it is limiting to 0, then inotropy becomes 0, and your Gibbs free energy is calculated by this formula, and using this formula you can calculate your spontaneity or know your spontaneity very easily if you know your enthalpy and the inotropy change. Last part of the summary. So what is the criteria for spontaneity? That your delta G should be negative. So this were the thing that we have discussed. So it is positive and negative. If entropy is positive and enthalpy is negative, that is spontaneous at all temperature. And if it is entropy is negative and enthalpy is positive, then it is non-spontaneous at all temperature. If both are negative, then the process is spontaneous at high temperature, because at low temperature, because it is negative at low temperature. And if both are positive, then the process is spontaneous at high temperature. Clear? Now we have seen the relation between delta G and Q, which is delta G equal delta G naught plus 2.303 RT log Q, or at equilibrium delta G becomes to 0. Therefore, delta G naught equal to minus RT L and K. So this was for all today for all today for the theory session. With this, I end my lecture. Thank you.